The night Nia Brooks' entire life cracked open. It was raining so hard over Chicago that the gutters couldn't keep up. Water ran in black rivers along the curbs outside the 24-hour diner where she worked, and the neon sign above the door buzzed and flickered like it was tired of holding on. She wasn't different from that sign. She'd been flickering for months. She was wiping down the same table she'd wiped down 40 minutes ago just to have something to do with her hands, when her phone lit up on the counter. 11 missed calls, all from the same number, Chicago Memorial Hospital. Nia stood there in her damp apron, staring at the screen for 5 full seconds before she called back. "Miss Brooks?" The doctor's voice was careful, practiced. The kind of careful that told you the person on the other end had delivered this kind of news before. "I need you to come in. Tonight, if possible. It's about your mother." Gloria Brooks was sitting up in the hospital bed when Nia arrived, her braids pinned back, her face arranged into the stubborn calm that Nia had known her whole life. The kind of calm that meant her mother was terrified, but refused to show it. Nia's stomach dropped before the doctor even opened his mouth. "Stage 3, Dr. Patel said. "Aggressive. We need to schedule surgery within 2 weeks, or the cancer will spread to her lymph nodes. After that, the prognosis changes significantly." "Okay," Nia said, because she needed to say something. "Okay, so we schedule it." The total procedure, including ICU recovery and post-operative care, is approximately $310,000. He paused. "Your mother's current insurance covers 40%. See, the upfront balance required before we can schedule is $155,000. The room went quiet, in the specific way rooms go quiet when a number like that lands in them. Gloria looked out the window. Nia looked at her hands. 2 weeks, Nia repeated. 2 weeks, Dr. Patel confirmed. Outside the hospital, in the rain, Nia did the math on the back of a receipt she found in her pocket. Diner wages, grocery stocking shifts, weekend hotel housekeeping. She added it all up 3 times, the way people add up numbers they already know are wrong, hoping the answer will change. It didn't change. At her current rate, accounting for rent, utilities, food, and her mother's existing prescriptions, it would take her 4.5 years to save $155,000. Her mother didn't have 4.5 years. She had 2 weeks. You know that moment when life gives you a deadline you're not ready for? But if you've ever had to be strong when everything felt like it was falling apart, take a second to like this video. It really helps stories like this reach more people who need them. Her best friend, Tasha Reed, showed up at her apartment at midnight with 2 takeout containers and a plan. Tasha always had a plan. She set her laptop on the kitchen table and started typing before Nia even sat down. "Go fund me," Tasha said. "We tell the truth. We post your mom's picture, not a sad one, a real one. Not because people give more when they see someone fighting. We share it everywhere. My cousin raised $60,000 for her kid's surgery in 2 months. 2 months, Nia said. I have 2 weeks. Then we work fast. No. Nia said it quietly, but Tasha stopped typing. I'm not putting my mother's illness on the internet for strangers to scroll past between cat videos and political arguments. She spent 40 years being a dignified woman. I'm not going to reduce her to a charity post. Tasha looked at her for a long moment. Nia, pride is not a currency. I know that. She did know that. She hated that she knew that, and still couldn't do it. I'll find another way. The other way came at 7 in the morning, through a staffing coordinator at Harbor Line Facility Services named Derek, who called her while she was still in her work uniform from the overnight hotel shift. He had a job, high-risk cleaning contract, overnight, a downtown Chicago, corporate headquarters. "What do you mean, high risk?" Nia asked. "The client is difficult, fires staff regularly. Very specific requirements." Derek cleared his throat. "It pays 28 an hour, plus overtime. The contract has potential for a long-term arrangement if the client is satisfied." "Who's the client?" A short pause. "Wolfe Systems. You know it?" Everybody in Chicago knew Wolfe Systems. The glass tower downtown, 50 stories of steel and tinted windows, the company behind half the city's infrastructure technology. And everybody who worked in service industries knew the name attached to it. Alexander Wolfe, 34 years old, worth somewhere north of $6 billion, and by all accounts, the most impossible human being in the city of Chicago to work for. "I know it," Nia said. "You want the job or not?" She thought about her mother in that hospital bed, looking out the window with her careful calm. She thought about the number on the back of that receipt. "Yes," she said, "I want the job." She showed up at the Wolfe Systems Tower at 10 p.m. that night, her cleaning cart loaded and her paperwork signed. The lobby was all white marble and blue light, and the kind of silence that feels enforced. A security chief named Grant Ellis met her at the elevator bank. He was broad-shouldered, with the flat expression of a man who had explained the same rules too many times. 40 floors, he said. To standard protocols on everything below the 49th, you do not go to the 50th floor. You do not touch the 50th floor. If Mr. Wolfe is in the building, you will not interact with him unless he initiates. If he fires you, you leave without argument and contact Harborline. He looked her over. Questions? What's on the 50th floor? Grant Ellis looked at her like she'd asked what color the sun was. Mr. Wolfe's private office. Right, Nia said. So I just don't go there. You just don't go there, he confirmed. She didn't go there. Not at first. She worked through the night, floor by floor. And she was good at this. Genuinely good. The kind of efficient that comes from years of practice, and the kind of thorough that comes from knowing the difference between a job done and a job done right. By 3 a.m., she'd cleared 38 floors. By 4 a.m., 41. By 4:30, she was running on the kind of tired that lives past exhaustion, where your body stops protesting and just goes numb. She took the elevator up to do a final check on 48. The elevator opened on 49 by mistake. She pressed the door close button, but for just a second, just one single second, she saw the door at the end of the hall, the door to 50. It was slightly ajar. A thin bar of gold light leaked from underneath it. She pressed close. The doors shut. She went back to 48. But at 5 a.m., 16 hours after she'd woken up for her previous shift, something in her body just stopped cooperating. She sat down at the cleaning cart to rest for 60 seconds, and instead found herself walking toward the elevator. She told herself she was just going to check the supply closet on 49. She told herself a lot of things. The 50th floor was cold. Not the cold of air conditioning, colder than that, and the cold of a space that doesn't expect human warmth. The office was enormous, one full wall of floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city, and the desk at the center was the most immaculate surface Nia had ever seen. Everything on it was at perfect right angles, every pen aligned, every paper corner squared. The chair behind the desk was leather. Deep. The kind of chair that costs more than her monthly rent. She sat down for 60 seconds. She was asleep in 40. And this is the moment everything changes. Before we see what happens when one of the most powerful men in Chicago finds a stranger sleeping in his chair, make sure you're subscribed. Because stories like this only get deeper the further we go. She didn't hear the elevator. She didn't hear the footsteps. What she heard, 17 minutes later, was the sound of someone very deliberately setting something on a hard surface, and her eyes opened to find Alexander Wolfe standing 4 feet away, watching her. Now, before we go any further, because what happens next is the moment this entire story turns, I need you to understand something about Alexander Wolfe that most people got wrong. The press called him cold. His competitors called him ruthless. The 3 assistants who'd quit in the last 2 years called him obsessive and terrifying, and various other words not suitable for this platform. And all of those things were true. But they were the symptom, not the diagnosis. You're about to see the diagnosis, and if this story is already doing something to you, drop a comment below. Tell me you're watching. Tell me you're here. Because what comes next is the part that changes everything. Alexander Wolfe did not look like a man who had just found a stranger asleep in his chair. He looked like a man who had stumbled onto something he didn't have a name for. He stood completely still, one hand resting at his side, the other holding a titanium phone worth $3,000. And he was watching her breathe. His office was the only place in the world where his mind ran quiet. No external input. No variables he hadn't controlled. The room was calibrated to his exact specifications. Temperature, light levels, the precise placement of every object on every surface. He had not shared this room with another living person in 2 years. He didn't share spaces. He didn't allow proximity. He had reasons for this that he had explained to 3 separate therapists and stopped explaining when the explanations started sounding like excuses. But she was asleep in his chair, and his mind was quiet. He stood there for 4 minutes. He knew it was 4 minutes because he counted. He stood there and watched her breathe, and felt the specific absence of the low-grade alarm that lived behind his sternum every moment he was awake. And for 4 minutes, for the first time in longer than he could remember, there was nothing, just a woman sleeping in his chair, and rain against the glass, and silence. Then she woke up. She went from asleep to vertical in approximately half a second, which told him she was used to sleeping lightly in unfamiliar places. She grabbed the arm of the chair to steady herself, spun sideways, and her fingers closed around his wrist. Both of them froze. Nia felt it first. A sharp, clean jolt like the static shock you get from touching a metal doorknob. Except it moved up her arm and into her chest, and sat there humming. She let go immediately, stumbled back against the desk, and pressed her hand to her sternum like she could push the feeling back out. Alexander felt it second, which was impossible, because Alexander Wolfe did not tolerate physical contact. His OCD, contamination-focused, compulsion-heavy, the kind that had once made him spend 40 minutes cleaning his hands after shaking a business associate's at a conference, should have triggered the moment her skin met his. The spiral should have started immediately. The intrusive thoughts, the certainty of contamination, the unbearable need to clean and re-clean until the feeling went away. None of that happened. He looked down at his wrist. He looked at her. He looked at his wrist again. "I'm so sorry," Nia said. Her voice was controlled, but barely. She could see from his face that she'd made a catastrophic error, and she was already doing damage control in her head. "I sat down for a minute. I've been awake I didn't mean to fall asleep. I know I wasn't supposed to be on this floor. You can call Harbor Line. I'll go." She moved toward her cart. Alexander said nothing. She got to the door. "You owe me for that mistake." She stopped, turned around slowly. "I'm sorry?" He looked at her with the flat, measuring expression she'd heard about, the one that made assistants type resignation letters. "You were in my chair. You touched me." He looked at his wrist again, briefly. "You owe me for that mistake. Come back tomorrow night, 8 p.m. We'll discuss terms." Nia stared at him. Terms. Terms. He looked away, toward the window, and whatever she had seen on his face for that brief moment, that confused, almost undone expression, was gone. His face was blank again. Professional. Oh, impenetrable. That will be all. She went home. She sat on the edge of her bed in her work uniform, and she tried to parse what had just happened. She had fallen asleep in a billionaire's chair. She had touched him without permission. And instead of firing her on the spot, he had told her she owed him something and to come back. She pulled up his Wikipedia page on her phone and read it twice. Then she texted Tasha. "Something happened at work tonight. Not sure if it's good or bad." So Tasha texted back immediately. "Define something." Nia put her phone down and didn't answer. The next evening, at 8 p.m. exactly, she was back. Not in her cleaning uniform this time. She wasn't sure why she'd changed into actual clothes, just that the cleaning uniform felt wrong for whatever this was. She took the elevator to 50, her heart performing an uncomfortable rhythm the whole way up. His penthouse wasn't the office. She'd misunderstood. A separate elevator, key access. It took her to the building's residential crown. She stepped out into a space that looked like an architect, and a control freak had collaborated on a manifesto. Every surface gleamed. The furniture was custom and minimal. There were no photographs, no art that suggested personal history, nothing soft or accidental anywhere. It was the most beautiful and most suffocating room she had ever been in. Alexander Wolfe was standing at the kitchen counter in a dark suit, and he had clearly just come from somewhere, or he dressed like this all the time, she couldn't tell. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit," he said. "I'd like to stand, actually." He looked up. Something moved in his expression. Surprise, quickly neutralized. "Fine." He set down the pen he was holding and came around the counter, stopping 6 feet away. He handed her a manila folder. "I know about your mother." The floor dipped under her feet again. "Excuse me?" "Gloria Brooks, 61, to Chicago Memorial. Stage 3 cancer. Surgical consult with Dr. Patel. $155,000 up front, needed within 2 weeks. He said it clinically, factually, the way someone reads a report. "I did some research after you left." "You researched my mother?" Her voice had gone very quiet. "I researched you. Your mother's situation was part of the picture." He nodded at the folder. "Open it." She opened it. The top page was a contract. She started reading. "And full medical coverage for Gloria Brooks, including surgery, ICU, rehabilitation, and ongoing oncological care. All existing medical debt cleared, monthly stipend, a transfer amount that totaled, over the 2-year period outlined in the document, $400,000. In exchange, a live-in personal household contract. His penthouse. 12 hours per day, 6 days per week. Start date, 48 hours from signing. No early termination clause. On no external employment during the contract period." She read it 3 times. "You want me to live here," she said, "and work for you? For 2 years?" "Yes." "This isn't a cleaning contract." "No, it's more comprehensive than that." "What does comprehensive mean?" She kept her voice level. "Because this contract says I live in your home, I work 12-hour days, I can't leave the arrangement early, and I can't take outside work. What is this, exactly?" Household management, he said. My current arrangement requires more capable staffing. You demonstrated last night a quality that I haven't encountered before. He paused, like he was choosing the next word carefully. Steadiness. Under pressure. In an unfamiliar space. That's valuable to me. For reasons he couldn't explain yet, the usual alarm in his head stayed quiet when she was near. I fell asleep in your chair. You were exhausted, and you didn't complain about it, didn't ask for special consideration, and didn't panic when you were confronted. He studied her. Most people panic around me. She looked at the contract. She looked at him. She looked at the contract again. No, she said. She put the folder on the counter and stepped back. I'm not signing this. He looked at her without expression. The money? I know what the money means. I know exactly what that money means for my mother. And I still can't sign this. I don't know what you actually want. And I don't know what I'm actually agreeing to. And this contract has no early termination clause, which means once I sign, I'm yours for 2 years, whether or not this turns into something I can't live with. She picked up her bag. I'll find another way. She left. She went home. She called the hospital to ask if any payment had come through. Was told no, and she lay in bed until 3 a.m. Making lists of things she could sell, and people she could call, and jobs she could take, and none of it added up. The next morning, the hospital called. Miss Brooks, I'm calling from billing. We've received full payment for your mother's surgery and post-operative care. The surgery is scheduled for Thursday. A pause. You're all set. Nia sat very still. I didn't make a payment. The payment came in late last night. Anonymous donation, processed through an attorney's office. On your mother's account is cleared. She hung up. She stared at her wall. Then she called Alexander Wolfe's number. It had been in the folder. And he picked up on the second ring. You paid anyway, she said. Yes. I said no. You said no to the contract. I paid for the surgery because your mother needed surgery. Those are two separate things. She sat with that for a moment. And the man who had drawn up a contract that read like a controlled acquisition had also paid for her mother's surgery with no strings, no leverage, no expectation of compliance. She didn't know what to do with that contradiction. Why? She asked. A long pause. Because I could, he said, and because it needed to be done. Another pause. The contract offer stands. Think about it. She thought about it for 6 hours. Then she signed it. Not because she had no choice. She'd told herself that at first, but it wasn't true. Her mother's surgery was paid for. She had a choice. She signed because something about the way he'd paid for it anyway, with no leverage, with no demand for compliance. Something about that felt like honesty. And in her experience, honesty was rare enough to be worth something. She moved in on a Thursday. If you're still here and your heart is doing that uncomfortable thing, that mix of hoping and bracing, drop a like on this video. Because we're just now getting to the part where everything starts to unravel. In the best and worst possible ways. The penthouse operated according to rules she hadn't fully understood from the contract. On her first morning, there was a printed schedule on the kitchen counter. It was 4 pages long. Breakfast, prepared by 7 a.m. On ingredients stored in specific shelf positions in the refrigerator, labeled with arrival dates. Food weighed before cooking. No substitutions without prior discussion. Coffee, precise ratio, prepared in a specific machine, using beans stored in a glass container on the second shelf of the upper cabinet, never the lower. Surfaces, wiped in a specific order with specific products. The cleaning solutions were arranged in a cabinet under the sink by type, and the types were not interchangeable. She was not to use product A where the schedule specified product B. She was not to improvise. Shoes at the entrance, removed and placed in the designated spot, heels aligned to the seam in the tile. No exceptions. Clothing, neutral tones, no prints, no bright colors, nothing that would register strongly in peripheral vision. Personal calls, not during work hours, which were 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The rules were specific to the point of strangeness, and in her first 3 days she broke 4 of them by accident, and each time Alexander Wolfe's face did something that she could only describe as barely contained distress, quickly suppressed. He never raised his voice. He never threatened her. He simply said, "That's not the process." And she said, "I understand. I'm sorry." And he nodded and looked away. On the 5th day, she stopped breaking the rules, not because she feared him, but because she had started to understand what the rules were for. She'd grown up with a mother who cleaned compulsively when she was anxious, the apartment always at its most spotless when Gloria was at her most afraid. Nia knew what order looked like when it was covering something up. She knew the difference between a person who liked things clean and a person who needed things clean to survive. Alexander Wolfe needed things clean to survive. She watched him, so she watched the way he checked the alignment of objects without seeming to notice he was doing it. His hand would drift to a pen on his desk and adjust it by 3 millimeters, and then he'd look faintly disturbed, like he'd caught himself. She watched the way he washed his hands, which was often and always at specific intervals, before eating, after touching anything that had been outside, after any human interaction, after opening mail. She counted once, 11 times in a single day. On day 9, she was reorganizing a supply cabinet, correctly, per the schedule, when he came in from a morning meeting and stopped in the doorway of the kitchen. He looked at his hands. He went to the sink. He washed them. He dried them, folded the towel back into its precise thirds, and placed it back on the bar. Then he stood there, both hands braced on the counter, and breathed. Nia didn't look directly at him. She kept working. She said, very casually, not making it mean anything, "So the lavender soap is better for your skin than the antibacterial one, if you're washing frequently." A long pause. "I'm aware," he said. His voice was slightly thicker than normal. "There's some under the left side of the sink, the one with the green cap." He didn't say anything. She finished with the cabinet and moved to the next task. 5 minutes later, she heard the click of the cabinet under the sink. She didn't say anything about it. But she wasn't sure why that felt important. To not acknowledge it, to not make it a thing he had to respond to. But it did. She just moved to the next task. The proximity thing started on day 11. She was handing him his coffee. The right ratio, the right temperature, in the right cup. And their fingers overlapped on the handle for less than a second. She felt it again, that static charge hum. She let go. He stood very still for a moment, and then set the cup down and walked to the window. So she watched his shoulders. She watched for the thing she'd heard about from Grant Ellis, who'd warned her during orientation. If he ever looks like he's going somewhere else in his head, step back and give him space. Don't speak. Don't touch anything. Just wait. The winding up, Grant had called it. The spiral. It didn't come. Alexander stood at the window for 40 seconds and then picked up his cup and drank his coffee. The next day he came and stood near her while she was working. Just near her. Not close enough to be strange, but closer than he usually stood. Close enough that she was aware of the specific temperature of the space between them. She kept working. He stood there for about 2 minutes, and then walked away without a word. This happened 4 more times over the next week. Just proximity. Just him placing himself nearby and then leaving. Like an experiment he was running on himself. She didn't ask about it. She learned, in those first weeks, that the most useful thing she could do for Alexander Wolfe was not make him explain himself. He was a man who had built his entire life around control, and being asked to articulate something he didn't understand yet felt, to him, like being asked to perform surgery on himself without anesthesia. She could see that, so she didn't ask. But she did, on the 14th day, ask about the photograph. It was the only personal object in the entire penthouse. A small, silver-framed photo, tucked in the back of the top shelf of the study. She'd found it while dusting. A family, younger versions, a man, a woman, 2 boys, and a little girl in a red dress. The girl couldn't have been more than 4. One of the boys was clearly a young Alexander. The same precise, measuring expression, even at what looked like 12 years old. "Who's the little girl?" she asked. He was at his desk. He went very still. "Her name was Lily," he said. Past tense. Flat. She was my sister." Nia set the frame back exactly where she'd found it. "She was beautiful." He didn't respond. She finished dusting and left the room, and she told herself that was the end of it. But that night, she lay in the guest room they'd given her, immaculate, temperature-controlled, with 4 different kinds of lavender soap on the bathroom counter that she was almost certain had appeared after her comment about the sink. And she thought about that photograph, and about the specific, careful way he'd said her name. Not the name of someone he was trying not to think about, the name of someone he thought about constantly and couldn't stop. She started doing research. She wasn't sure why exactly. Maybe because information about Alexander Wolfe was scattered and contradictory. The press coverage described a machine, and the machine she was living with was something more complicated than that. She found an old article from the Boston Globe. A fire on 20 years ago. A house in Brookline. 2 fatalities. His father. His sister, Lily. She read the article twice. Then she sat for a long time in the controlled quiet of her room and thought about what it meant to be the person who survived. "Now, I need you to stay with me here, because this is the part of the story most people miss. Most people see Alexander Wolfe, and they see the control, the rules, the obsession, and they call it character. But it isn't character. It's grief. It's guilt. But it's a 12-year-old boy who walked out of a burning house and spent the next 22 years trying to make the world clean enough that nothing like that could ever happen again. You feel that? If you do, tell me in the comments. I want to know what this is doing to you, because we're not even at the hardest part yet." 3 weeks into the contract, Alexander told her about the fire. He didn't mean to. It came out sideways, the way the truest things do. Not announced, not structured, and just a sentence that slipped through a gap in the usual armor. They were in the kitchen at 6 in the morning. She was making breakfast. He was at the counter with his laptop, going through something that had made his jaw tight. She wasn't talking to him. She'd learned when to be silent. And then, without looking up, he said, "My father left a space heater running in the garage. I had been meaning to move it. I kept forgetting." She didn't look up from the pan. "Okay," she said carefully. "It was winter. February. I was 12. A pause. "I was on the 2nd floor. I smelled the smoke and I got out through the window." Another pause. "My father was in the garage. Lily was in her room. She was 4. He closed the laptop. By the time the fire department arrived, the garage had gone through to the back of the house. He looked at the counter. "I keep thinking, if I had moved the heater." if I had noticed the wiring. I knew the wiring in that garage was old. I thought about it, and I didn't do anything about it. Nia turned off the burner. She stood with her back to him for a moment, because she didn't trust her face right now. "You were 12 years old," she said. "Some wounds stay with people for decades, even when the world thinks they've moved on. If this part of the story hit you emotionally, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every comment, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. I was old enough to notice. Oh, old enough to act. You were a child. Your father was an adult who left a space heater running. I survived," he said. Like that was the argument. Like that settled it. She turned around. He was looking at her with the blank expression, but his eyes were doing something else entirely. Something braced, almost challenging, like he was waiting for her to either agree that his guilt was justified or try to argue him out of it. She didn't do either. "Surviving something terrible doesn't make you responsible for it," she said. "It just means you survived." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop and went back to work. She plated his breakfast and set it in front of him, and neither of them spoke again for 40 minutes. But he ate. He ate the whole thing, which was unusual. He usually ate in the controlled, measured way he did everything, enough to meet the nutritional requirements he'd assigned himself, no more. On that morning he ate like he hadn't realized he was hungry. She filed that away and said nothing. The hospital visit happened on a Tuesday. Nia's mother, Gloria, was recovering well from surgery, but visiting was complicated by the contract's restrictions on personal time. Alexander had included a provision for 1 hospital visit per week, 3 hours, in the schedule. It was generous by the contract's standards. It was also, she'd noticed, something he'd added after their conversation about the surgery payment, not something she'd asked for. On the 4th visit, she mentioned it in passing. "My mother keeps asking when she's going to meet the man who paid for her operation." Alexander didn't respond. She let it drop. But 2 days later, when she was leaving for the hospital, he was in the elevator when the doors opened. He was wearing a coat. He wasn't looking at her. He pressed the lobby button. "No, you don't have to come," she said. "I'm aware," he said. He didn't get out. They took his car. He sat the entire ride with his hands on his thighs, very still, looking out the window. She watched him out of the corner of her eye and saw the precise, contained way he was managing something. Breathing at careful intervals, the slight tension in his jaw, the way he didn't let himself fidget. "You don't like hospitals," she said. "No one likes hospitals. You especially don't like hospitals." A pause. "The smell," he said, "and the surfaces." He looked out the window. Hospitals are high-contact environments. Many people, many touch points, minimal individual cleaning protocols. "We don't have to stay long." "I didn't say that." He looked at his hands. "I just said I didn't like them." In the elevator at Chicago Memorial, he stood with 2 inches of space between himself and the wall and didn't touch the buttons. She pressed them. She pretended not to notice. They walked down the corridor, and when a nurse pushed a cart past them from the wrong direction, and his shoulder almost made contact with the nurse's arm, she saw his breath hitch, saw the quick, controlled reset. "Almost there," she said quietly, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked at her with something that wasn't measured or controlled or blank. It was almost grateful. Almost. Gloria Brooks was sitting up in bed with a crossword puzzle and reading glasses on the end of her nose. She looked up when they came in, and her eyes moved from Nia to Alexander with the sharp, unhurried assessment of a woman who had spent 61 years learning to read people in the first 3 seconds. "Mr. Wolfe," she said. Not a question. A statement. An acknowledgement. Mrs. Brooks. He stopped at the foot of the bed. He didn't extend a hand, but he dipped his head with a formality that struck Nia as almost old-fashioned. I'm glad the surgery went well. Are you? Gloria set down her crossword. Sit. He sat. He sat with the stiff, contained posture of a man in hostile territory who was refusing to show it. Nia pulled a chair next to him and sat, and for 10 minutes the three of them talked about nothing significant. Gloria's recovery, the nurses, and the bad coffee from the vending machine. Alexander spoke in short, precise sentences. Gloria watched him the whole time. Then Gloria said, "You paid for my life." He looked at her. Yes, without being asked, without a condition attached. The contract came after. Yes, it did. Gloria folded her hands in her lap. Her voice was kind and completely unintimidated. I spent a few days wondering, what kind of man does a thing like that? Pays for a stranger's surgery and then draws up a contract that locks her daughter into his home for 2 years. She tilted her head. And I think I understand it now. You gave freely and then panicked, didn't you? Realized you'd made yourself vulnerable. So you drew up the contract to put a wall back up. The room went very still. Alexander said nothing. His face was the blank mask. But his hands, Nia noticed, had gone tight on the arms of the chair. You paid for my life, Gloria said, and I thank you for that with everything I have. But you don't own my daughter. Not her time, not her choices, not what happens between whatever this is. She gestured between him and Nia. You hear me? Gloria, Nia started. Hush. Gloria kept her eyes on Alexander. You hear me? Another silence. And then, quietly, like something being set down after being carried for a long time. Yes, Alexander Wolfe said. I hear you. He was quiet the whole way back. She let him be quiet. And they were almost at the building when he said, without looking at her, She's extraordinary, your mother. I know, Nia said. She's right, he said, about the contract. She didn't say anything. I did panic, he said. After the payment, I felt... He stopped. His jaw worked. Exposed, he finally said. I felt exposed. And I'm not good at that. Being seen without armor. He looked out the window. The contract was armor. I know, she said again, softly. Oh, he didn't say anything else until they were in the elevator. Then, I'm going to start therapy, properly. I've tried before, but I stopped when it became a pause. When it became necessary to keep going. That's usually when you need to keep going, she said. Yes. He looked at her. I'm aware. She almost smiled. She pressed her lips together instead. He started therapy that same week. She didn't ask about it, and he didn't explain it. But she noticed. On the days he had a session, he came home quieter. Not the controlled quiet of his usual self-management. A different kind, softer, like a room that's been aired out. She noticed other things, too. The hand-washing intervals were getting slightly less frequent. Not dramatically. 4 fewer times in a day, on average. But she was counting. On the day she got to 8 times, she allowed herself to think maybe. 3 weeks later, he tore up the contract. He did it in the kitchen, on a Sunday morning, and he took it out of the drawer where it had been filed, and he tore it in half, and then in half again, and he put the pieces in the recycling bin. Then he turned around. The money is yours, he said. All of it, the full amount, as a gift. Not a debt, not a salary. A gift. He looked at her steadily. You can leave today if you want. You can take the money and go, and I won't. It won't change what you're owed. A pause. I'm not good at this. I had saying what I mean without it sounding like a transaction. He looked away briefly. What I mean is, if you stay, it has to be because you want to. Not because of a contract. Not because of money. If you leave, that's... His voice shifted, almost imperceptibly. That's also correct. You should do whatever is correct for you. Nia looked at the recycling bin. She looked at him. I need a few days, she said. Yes, he said. Of course. She packed a bag that afternoon and went to stay with Tasha. Alexander walked her to the elevator and pressed the button and stepped back. And when the doors opened, he said, "Thank you for the lavender soap recommendation." She stepped in. The doors closed. She was gone for 3 days. Tasha's apartment smelled like takeout and nail polish and the specific comfortable chaos of someone who had never once aligned her shoes by the door. Nia sat on the couch on the first evening and ate pad thai and tried to explain what the last month had been. So he paid for your mom's surgery, Tasha said, without conditions. Then he drew up a contract. Then he tore up the contract. And then he said, you should leave if you want, but you can stay if you want. And oh, also here's $400,000. Yes. And you're thinking about going back. I'm trying to figure out if I want to, or if I've been in that environment long enough that wanting to go back is the same thing as just not knowing anywhere else right now. Tasha set down her fork. What happens when you think about him? Not the penthouse, not the contract. Him. Nia was quiet for a moment. I think about the lavender soap, she said. I recommended it off the cuff, and then there was suddenly a whole shelf of it in the bathroom. He didn't mention it. He just put it there. Like a person who doesn't know how to say thank you out loud, so they say it in actions. That's either very sweet or very concerning. I know. Nia picked up her fork again. I know it's both. Do you like him? He's not likable. That's not what I asked. Nia put down her fork for the second time. She thought about the photograph of Lily in the red dress. She thought about his hands on the armrest in her mother's hospital room, going tight. She thought about 4 minutes. The 4 minutes he'd stood and watched her sleep, and something in him had gone quiet. He's trying, she said finally. He's genuinely, desperately trying. And he doesn't have anyone. He has no one who sees that. You see it. I see it. Tasha picked up her fork. Then you already know what you're going to do. On the morning of the 4th day, Nia stood outside Alexander Wolfe's building in jeans and a coat that was her own. Not the neutral-toned wardrobe the contract had specified. No contract, no uniform, just herself, with her bag on her shoulder and her phone in her hand. And a knock she was about to make on a door she had no obligation to knock on. She knocked. He opened the door in a way that told her he hadn't been sleeping well. And not dramatically. He was dressed, composed, his face arranged in its usual architecture. But there were small signs, if you knew how to read them. Slight tension around his eyes, an almost imperceptible delay in his posture settling. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the bag. You're back, he said. I'm back. You don't have to be. I know that, she said. That's why I'm here. She stepped forward, and before he could process it, before he could calculate or brace or execute the careful management of approach, she took his hand. Not the accidental brush of the cleaning cart, not the contact of handing over a coffee cup. Her hand, deliberately, wrapped around his. He went very still. She waited. She watched his face. She watched for the spiral, the flinch, the reflex of contamination response. She watched for the 12-year-old boy with survivor's guilt, who had spent 22 years trying to make the world clean enough to feel safe. His eyes closed for 3 seconds. They opened. No panic. No spiral. No jolt of static electricity. Not this time. Not the charge of two people who couldn't be near each other without something reactive happening between them. Something else. Something calmer and more complete. Just warmth. "Hi," she said quietly. He looked down at their joined hands. And something moved across his face. Too many things at once to name. None of them controlled. All of them real. "Hi," he said. She came in. He made coffee, the right ratio, in the right cups, but this time without the schedule, without the clock. She sat at the kitchen island and watched him, and told him about Tasha's apartment, and the pad thai, and the conversation. And he stood at the counter and listened, and twice almost smiled. The days that followed were different, yet not transformed. She wasn't naive enough to believe that 22 years of carefully constructed armor dissolves in a month. He still aligned his shoes. He still washed his hands more than most people. He still had the schedule, because the schedule, she'd come to understand, wasn't about control for its own sake. It was about predictability, about reducing the variables that triggered the anxiety spiral. It's about giving his nervous system something reliable to hold on to while the therapy did the longer, slower work. But the rules had loosened at the edges. She could wear a patterned blouse now, as long as it wasn't too loud. He had asked her once if she wanted to take the guest room's curtains down, and she had said yes, and he had taken them down himself and replaced them with something lighter, something that let more of the city's light in. He didn't explain why. She didn't ask. One afternoon she mentioned, without much thought behind it, that she'd been thinking about nursing school. She'd said it almost to herself. She was looking out at the city when she said it, and she half expected him to say nothing. He said, "You'd be good at it." She turned. He was at his desk, not looking up. "You think so? You have good diagnostic instincts. You observe before you intervene. You don't project." He turned a page. "Most people project. They tell you what they would feel in your position instead of reading what you actually feel. You read people correctly. That's the skill you can't teach." She stood there for a moment. Then she went and sat down and opened the admissions page for Northwestern's nursing program and started reading. She didn't say thank you. She just started reading. And somehow that felt, in the language they'd developed between them, exactly right. Gloria was released from the hospital in week 6, or she came home to her own apartment, which Nia had quietly ensured was clean and stocked and ready, and she called Nia the evening she arrived home and said, "Baby, I'm home." And Nia sat in the Wolfe Systems penthouse, with the phone to her ear, and let herself cry for the first time since the night in the hospital parking lot in the rain, and Alexander came and sat beside her on the couch, close enough, and didn't say anything. Just sat there. That was the moment, if there was a moment. Not the electric shock in the dark office, not the torn-up contract, not even the deliberate handhold at the door. It was this, sitting on a couch while she cried about her mother being alive, and him being simply, quietly, there. His estranged mother, Margaret Wolfe, called 2 weeks later. Nia was in the other room, ostensibly, but the penthouse was not large enough for a conversation to be fully private. She heard pieces. She heard him say, "I know, Mother." She heard him say, "I should have called sooner." She heard, after a long pause, "I'll come to Boston." In the spring. When he came back into the kitchen, his face was very controlled, which meant everything under it was not. She handed him the lavender soap. A joke, barely. A small, quiet thing. He looked at it. He looked at her. And he laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It wasn't the full, unguarded laugh of someone with nothing to protect. It was new and small, and almost surprised. See, like a room in a house that had been locked for 20 years, cracked open just enough to let the air in. But it was real. It was completely, unmistakably real. "Put that back," he said. "It's on the counter," she said. "That's not the designated position." "You're right," she said, not moving it. "Nia, it's 1 inch from the designated position. That's not. It's not going anywhere. It's right there." He picked it up and put it in the designated position, and then stood there pretending to look out the window, and she could absolutely see, that he was fighting a second laugh. He lost, just slightly. The corner of his mouth moved. 1 year later, Gloria Brooks was in remission. She had taken up oil painting, which she had always wanted to do and never had time for, and her small apartment had acquired a dozen canvases in various stages, and the specific cheerful chaos of someone who had been given their life back and decided to fill it with color. Nia was in her 2nd semester at Northwestern, studying nursing. She was good at it, her professor had said, in almost the same words Alexander had used, that she had strong diagnostic instincts and excellent patient communication. She texted Alexander a photo of her grade report. He texted back, "Obviously," while she sent back, "You're insufferable." He sent back, "Accurate." Tasha was engaged to a man named Marcus, who made her laugh until she couldn't breathe, and who had, on their first date, moved every object on the restaurant table slightly out of alignment, and watched Tasha's face, and decided on the spot that she was the one. Nia was her maid of honor. She was already dreading the speech, and looking forward to it in equal measure. Alexander was attending therapy weekly now. His therapist's name was Dr. Okafor, and he was brilliant and patient, and had told Alexander in their 3rd session something that Alexander had repeated to Nia one evening, almost shyly. He said the OCD isn't a moral failing. It isn't punishment. It's just my nervous system asking for help. He'd said it looking at the window. She'd said nothing, because he didn't need her to say anything. He just needed someone to hear it. On the evening of their 1-year anniversary of whatever this was, neither of them had named it, which was itself a kind of naming. She cooked dinner, not according to the schedule, according to what she felt like making, which was pasta, which required flour. The kitchen had flour on 3 surfaces by the time the pasta dough was done. The counter, the edge of the island, a very small amount on the front of her shirt. She heard Alexander come in from his evening run. She heard him stop in the kitchen doorway. She braced slightly. The flour, the mess, the deviation from the controlled surfaces. She turned around. He was looking at the counter, at the flour, at the general cheerful disaster of a kitchen that had been used. His face went through something. She watched it, that took 3 seconds, and ended somewhere she hadn't quite seen on him before. He laughed. Full this time. Not enormous, not theatrical. Alexander Wolfe was never going to be theatrical, but full. Real and full and unguarded, and briefly, completely his. "Or there is flour," he said, "on the backsplash." "I see that," she said. "The backsplash is tile. It's a vertical surface. How did you get flour on a vertical surface?" "Enthusiasm," she said. He shook his head. He came to the counter. not to wipe it. Not yet. And he stood beside her and looked at the pasta dough and the scattered flour and the absolute mess she had made of his perfect kitchen. And he said, "This is a disaster." "It's dinner," she said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he reached past her for an apron. His, which she had been banned from using for the first 3 weeks, and which she'd been using freely for the last 2 months, and tied it on. He washed his hands. He looked at the dough. "What do you need?" he asked. "A rolling pin, top cabinet, left side." He got the rolling pin. He handed it to her. Their fingers overlapped. No static charge, no reactive jolt of two people brushing against each other in the dark. Just his hand, just hers, just warmth, steady and unremarkable and entirely enough. She reached up and touched a small smear of flour on his jaw that he hadn't noticed. He went still for 1 second. The old reflex, faint now, an echo rather than a command. And then he was just still, because she was touching his face. And that was something he was still learning to receive without bracing for it. "You've got flour on you," she said. "I haven't started cooking yet." "You've been standing near me. Collateral damage." He looked at her. That expression again. Too many things at once. None of them controlled. All of them real. And underneath all of it, something easier than she had seen on him before. Something that looked very much like peace. "Nia," he said. Thank you." He said it simply, without performance. "For coming back." She looked at him for a long moment. The city was gold and dark outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kitchen smelled like flour and olive oil, and the lavender soap that lived permanently on the counter now, no longer in its designated position, just there, because she'd put it there and he'd stopped moving it back. "I was always going to come back," she said. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. "That's the whole point." She turned back to the pasta dough. He stood beside her. There was flour on the counter, and flour on the backsplash, and flour on the front of her shirt. And Alexander Wolfe, the man who had once spent 40 minutes recleaning his hands after a handshake, the man who had built his entire life into an attempt to control every variable that could possibly lead to loss, did not reach for a cloth. He picked up a wooden spoon and started on the sauce. The flour stayed on the counter. The flour stayed on the backsplash. Dinner was late by 40 minutes, and the pasta was slightly uneven because neither of them had done this before, together, and in a kitchen that smelled like something warm was happening in it. They ate at the island. They talked about Gloria's new paintings, about Tasha's wedding venue, about a paper Nia was writing for her nursing program on patient communication in high-anxiety environments. She didn't mention that she'd been thinking about Alexander while writing it. He mentioned, quietly, that his trip to Boston to see his mother was scheduled for the end of the month. He said it like it was a small thing. She knew it wasn't. "She'll be glad to see you," Nia said. "I don't know that." "I know that." He was quiet, and then, "You're doing that thing where you read people correctly. I told you it was a skill." "You did." A pause. "Dr. Okafor says it's good for me. Being around someone who doesn't require me to perform stability." He looked at his plate. "I told him that sounded like I was using you as a therapeutic tool." He looked up. "He said that's not what it means. And he said it means I'm learning to be real with someone." "Are you?" she asked. "Being real?" He looked at her for a long moment. The evening light from the city caught the angles of his face and made him look, briefly, like the 12-year-old boy in the photograph. Not the grief on him, not the guilt, just the face before those things had finished settling in. Young and uncertain and present. "I'm trying," he said. I know, she said. I can see that. After dinner, he cleaned the kitchen, and she helped. They didn't talk much, just moved around each other in the comfortable, practiced way of two people who have learned each other's patterns. He wiped the counter. The flour came up clean, and she washed the pasta pot, and they moved through the space the way people move through spaces they have quietly claimed together, neither fully noticing that they're doing it. When the kitchen was clean, he stood at the counter and looked at the lavender soap. It's not in the designated position, he said. No, she agreed. He looked at it. He looked at her. He left it where it was. That night, from the window of the penthouse, the city of Chicago was every shade of amber and black, and the rain had come back, light this time, tapping against the glass like it was asking permission. Nia stood at the window and thought about a different rainy night. A diner, a buzzing neon sign, a phone with 11 missed calls. And how completely, how utterly, unimaginably far that felt from this moment. She thought about her mother painting in a sun-filled apartment. She thought about Tasha, planning a wedding. She thought about Alexander in the other room, probably straightening something that didn't need to be straightened and then putting it back, practicing the part of himself that was learning to let things be. She thought about a 4-year-old girl in a red dress in a photograph on a shelf, and she thought about a 12-year-old boy who walked out of a burning house and spent 22 years trying to make the world clean enough to feel safe in. She thought about what it meant that he was beginning, slowly, imperfectly, with weekly therapy appointments and a lavender soap that had been moved permanently out of its designated position, to feel safe without the world being perfectly clean. Healing is daily work. It's not a moment. It's not a contract torn in half, or a first voluntary touch, or a laugh at flour on a backsplash. It's the accumulated weight of 1,000 tiny choices to stay, to keep trying, to let someone see you even when being seen feels like standing in a burning doorway. It's reaching for someone's hand in a hospital hallway and finding that the panic doesn't come. It's leaving the soap out of place. It's cooking pasta together in a messy kitchen and eating it late and talking until the city goes quiet and waking up the next morning to do it again. Alexander came to stand beside her at the window. He didn't say anything. He looked at the rain. She reached over without looking at him and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers. No electricity, no shock, no test, no experiment, no careful management of approach. Just warmth. Just them. Just this. If this story moved something in you, if you saw yourself in Nia's desperation, or in Alexander's armor, or in the slow, hard, a daily work of choosing to stay open to someone, then this video was made for you. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Leave a comment. Tell me which moment hit you hardest. And if you watched this all the way to the end, hit that like button. Because you just sat with a story about two people learning that freedom is what makes love real, and that deserves to be counted.